10 years.
What's your name?
To me, if death comes, let it comes.
When someone you know falls into a coma, it truly leaves everyone in tears.
It wasn't going to be that bad. She was going to be okay. She was going to be okay.
But sometimes life surprises us, and they come back in the most crazy ways, bringing hope and joy back into our lives.
Gary, it was him. I couldn't believe it was him.
Today, let's talk about people who came back to life after years. Number 1, Martin Pistorius. Martin Pistorius fell seriously ill at the age of 12, contracting cryptococcal meningitis and tuberculosis of the brain. This illness left him in a coma-like state for over a decade. Although he appeared unresponsive, Martin could actually hear, see, and understand everything happening around him. He just couldn't move or communicate with anyone. To cope with his situation and maintain his sanity, Martin used his imagination. He pictured himself as a tiny person climbing into a spaceship, or imagined his wheelchair transforming into a flying vehicle. After nearly 13 years of being trapped in his body, Martin finally found a way to communicate. Using a computer with special software, he was able to reveal that he had been conscious all along. This breakthrough allowed him to reconnect with the world and share his story. Today, he is able to move, however, he still cannot communicate through his voice. He still uses the software to be able to speak to the world. Number 2, Munira Abdullah. This is Munira Abdullah, a woman from the United Arab Emirates who survived a devastating car accident in 1991. Munira was 32 years old and on her way to pick up her son, Omar, from school when tragedy struck. Munira was in a car accident. Her brother-in-law was driving and they crashed into a bus. Munira hugged her 4-year-old son to keep him safe, but she got hurt badly. She hurt her brain and went into a deep sleep that lasted 27 years. During this time, she couldn't talk or move. Doctors in London tried to help her at first, but then she went back to her home in Callahan, UAE. She stayed there for many years, and her family took care of her. In 2017, things changed. The leaders in Abu Dhabi helped Munira go to Germany for better treatment. She had surgeries to fix her arms and legs, and she took medicine to help her wake up. After a few days, Munira did something amazing. She said Omar's name. This was the first time she spoke in 27 years. Omar was so happy because he never stopped believing his mom would wake up. Munira's recovery took time, but she got better every day. She went back to Abu Dhabi for more therapy to help her sit up straight and keep her muscles working. Number 3, Terry Wallace. Now, imagine going to sleep and waking up nearly 2 decades later to a world that has completely changed. That's exactly what happened to Terry Wallace, an American man from the Ozark Mountains who experienced one of the most crazy comebacks in medical history. In 1984, Terry was in a serious car accident that caused a severe head injury, putting him into a coma. At first, doctors thought he was in a persistent vegetative state, meaning he was alive but didn't respond to anything. But as time passed, Terry started showing small signs of consciousness. Then, on June 11, 2003, something incredible happened. After 19 years, Terry spoke his first word since the accident, Mum. It was a breakthrough moment that amazed everyone. Doctors studied his brain to figure out how it could rewire itself after so long. Terry's awakening brought mixed emotions. He had to catch up on almost 2 decades of life and adjust to a world that had changed a lot. His fiancée, the girl he was supposed to marry when the accident happened, had moved on and had children with someone else. And his baby daughter, Amber, was now a grown woman working in a strip club. Coming to terms with these changes was tough for Terry. Number 4, Harrison Ojegba. Harrison Ojegba. Okene's survival story is nothing short of miraculous. Trapped at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in a capsized tugboat, Harrison found himself in a shrinking air pocket, managing to survive for 3 intense days. Dressed in nothing but his boxer shorts and battling the freezing cold, Harrison clung to a prayer, the last psalm his wife had texted him, which he referred to as the prayer for deliverance. He truly believed his survival was a divine intervention, especially as his oxygen supply dwindled at a depth of 30 meters. Harrison's rescue was nothing short of crazy. Initially dispatched to recover bodies, the diving team was stunned to discover Harrison alive. Can you imagine their disbelief when a hand suddenly came up on the monitor and grabbed one of the divers? Surviving on just a single bottle of Coke, he was on the brink of losing hope when he heard the distant hum of a boat engine, and he banged on the hull, hoping to attract attention. but the sound faded away, leaving him feeling more alone than ever. The diver wasted no time in warming Harrison up with hot water and providing him with an oxygen mask before bringing him to the surface. Once there, Harrison was placed in a decompression chamber, finally safe after enduring an unimaginable trial. Number 5. Particle beam incident. Back on July 13, 1978, while he was working at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Russia, Bugorski accidentally stuck his head right in the path of a super powerful proton beam from a particle accelerator. Bugorski got hit with a whopping 3,000 grays of radiation. That is 600 times more than what is considered a fatal dose, but he survived. Right after it happened, Bugorski saw this flash of light that was brighter than anything he'd ever seen. They rushed him to the hospital, but most folks thought he was a goner, yet by some miracle, he didn't feel immediate pain. The proton beam was super focused, which might be why he didn't suffer more damage inside. After the accident, Bugorski's left side was paralyzed, and it stayed that way. But weirdly, it didn't age like the rest of his face. Even though the accident messed up parts of his brain, he didn't have any big problems with thinking or learning. Bugorski even finished his PhD and kept doing science stuff, though he did have some seizures and felt tired sometimes. Almost 50 years later, Bugorski's still around, and his story shows just how tough humans can be, even when things get really, really crazy. Number 6. Masabumi Hosono. Masabumi Hosono's experience on the Titanic is quite a story. He was the only Japanese person on board when the ship sank in 1912. After working in Russia for 2 years, he was heading back home to Tokyo when disaster struck. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, Hosono was initially turned away from the lifeboats, but he managed to sneak his way up to the deck. As the lifeboats were being loaded, mostly with women and children, Hosono thought he was facing his end with honor. Then he heard an officer shouting that there was room for 2 more men. Seeing another man jump into a lifeboat, Hosono followed suit and helped row away from the sinking ship. But his return to Japan was far from easy. Instead of being hailed as a survivor, he faced harsh criticism. People accused him of cowardice for not going down with the ship, and some even spread rumors that he had dressed as a woman to escape. This negative publicity cost him his job and led to him being shunned by society, including his own family. The humiliation haunted him for the rest of his life, even after his death in 1939. It wasn't until 1997 that his reputation began to recover. His family published his personal account of that fateful night. This helped restore some of his honor and prompted people to view him in a more sympathetic light. Number 7. Ayanda Nkana. Ayanda Nkana's story is one for the history books. After a severe car accident in 2005 left him in a coma, his wife, driven by her research, convinced his doctors to try a new approach 7 years later. They administered sleeping pills, specifically Stilnox, which earned the nickname the Lazarus drug in South African media. After just 5 days of treatment, Nkana regained consciousness, surprising everyone. Number 8. Donald Herbert. Here's a story that's both heartwarming and bittersweet. Donald Herbert was a firefighter from Buffalo, New York, who became famous for his surprising awakening from a nearly decade-long coma. Back in 1995, Donald had suffered serious brain damage while fighting a fire, leaving him minimally responsive for almost 10 years. Then, out of the blue, last spring, he had a miracle moment. After trying out a new combination of drugs, he suddenly woke up and asked, "Where's Linda?" For the next 14 hours, he chatted non-stop with his family. Can you imagine the shock and joy? However, the clarity didn't last. He died just a year after waking up from the coma. Imagine you have a family member who wakes up after 10 years and then passes away. Would you be grateful that you got to hear them again, or will it make you more sad? Number 9. Sarah Scantlin. After 2 decades in a coma-like state following a tragic hit-and-run accident in 1984, Sarah Scantlin finally woke up in February 2005. Her journey back to consciousness was long, involving surgeries on her limbs and intensive speech therapy to relearn how to communicate. Despite being silent and immobile for all those years, Sarah's family discovered that she was somehow aware of many events happening around her. When her father asked her about 9/11s shortly after she woke up, her response was accurate, despite her limited ability to speak. Sarah's accident had shattered her promising life, leaving her in a state where she could barely move or communicate. For her family, it was like living in a nightmare, never knowing if she would wake up or what her condition would be if she did. But against all odds, Sarah defied expectations and regained consciousness. Number 10. Gary Dockery. Can you believe the twists and turns in Gary Dockery's story? Think of this. He's out there doing his duty as a cop in Tennessee back in '88 when he gets shot in the head and he slips into a coma for 7.5 years. Can you even imagine what that must have been like? But just when everyone's probably lost hope, bam! He wakes up in '96 after some lung surgery, chatting away like nothing ever happened. It's like a miracle, right? Gary's memory game was strong too. He recalled names, remembered his horses, and even knew the color of his ride. But man, talk about a roller coaster ride, because just when you think everything's turning around, he slips back into a coma only 18 hours later. And sadly, that's where his journey ends. Passed away the next April at just 43. Number 11. Mauro Prosperi. Meet Mauro Prosperi, an Italian guy who used to be a police officer and a pentathlete. Back in 1994, he found himself in a real-life survival adventure during the Marathon des Sables, a super tough race through the Sahara Desert. Now, this guy was used to tough challenges, having been to the Olympics and World Championships, but let me tell you, the Sahara had something else in store for him. Think of this, it's day 4 of the race, and Prosperi's trucking along when suddenly a massive sandstorm hits. Instead of hiding like the organizers suggested, he keeps going, hoping to find a safe spot. But guess what? No such luck. The storm goes on for 7 hours, leaving him totally lost and confused in the desert with no idea where to go. For the next 9 days, Prosperi's out there in the sand, walking for miles and miles. His food is running out and he's almost out of water. So what does he do? He gets resourceful. He starts drinking his own pee to stay hydrated and even eats bats he finds in a shrine to keep himself going. Yep, you heard that right. Just when things seem really bad, Prosperi comes across a group of people called the Berbers. They give him some goat's milk, which his body isn't too happy about after going so long without proper food. But hey, it's better than nothing, right? He gets taken to a hospital and eventually makes it back to Rome. Now, you might think after all that, Prosperi would never want to see another race again. But nope, he's not like that. He went on to finish the Marathon des Sables multiple times, and in 2001, he even came in 13th place. Talk about determination. Number 12, Chris Gursky. Chris Gursky had a crazy experience during a hang gliding trip in November 2018 that made headlines worldwide. While vacationing in Interlaken, Switzerland, Gursky decided to give hang gliding a shot. Little did he know, his first flight would turn into an adrenaline-pumping fight for survival. The trouble started right after takeoff when Gursky realized he wasn't properly strapped into the glider. Yep, you read that correctly. The instructor forgot to secure his safety harness. Suddenly, Gursky found himself clinging onto the glider for dear life, relying solely on his grip strength and determination. For an intense 2 minutes and 14 seconds, he held on as the glider soared through the air, his body hanging perilously below. Despite the terrifying situation, Gursky miraculously escaped with only minor injuries. He ended up with a fractured wrist and some bruised muscles. But considering the circumstances, it could have been much worse. After receiving medical treatment, Gursky didn't let the incident deter him from pursuing his adventurous spirit. He returned to hang gliding, this time with a different instructor, and had a much smoother and safer flight. Number 13, Bahia Bakari. Bahia Bakari's journey of survival began on June 30th, 2009, when she was just 12 years old. She boarded Yamenia Flight 626 with her mother, going on a summer vacation from Paris to the Comoros. Little did she know, this routine flight would scare her for life. The Airbus A310 crashed into the Indian Ocean near the north coast of Grand Comore, Comoros, claiming the lives of all but one aboard, Bahia. The crash, caused by errors in flight control, plunged Bahia into a nightmare. Despite the chaos, she clung to a piece of wreckage, alone in the vast ocean. For over 9 harrowing hours, Bahia floated in the heavy seas, her survival instincts kicking in despite having no life vest and limited swimming skills. The darkness only added to her ordeal. Eventually, fishermen spotted her and came to her rescue after 11 agonizing hours adrift. Bahia was rushed to Moroni Hospital, where she received treatment for her injuries, including a fractured pelvis and collarbone and burns to her knees. Her survival really shocked the world, earning her the nickname the Miracle Girl, and drawing attention from global leaders like French President Nicolas Sarkozy. But Bahia's journey didn't end with her rescue. She bravely shared her story in a memoir and testified against Yemenia Airways in court, seeking justice for the victims. Number 14, Julianne Koepcke. Talk about a rough landing. Julianne Koepcke not only survived a plane disintegrating mid-air over the Amazon rainforest in 1971, but she also endured a 2-mile plunge to the ground while still strapped to her seat. If that wasn't wild enough, she then spent 10 days going through one of the most challenging environments on Earth, using only the survival skills she learned from her parents. Julianne's real-life action adventure ended when she finally found help, proving that sometimes reality can outdo any action movie. Number 15, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You can never guess what this man has survived by looking at his face. Tsutomu Yamaguchi might just be the luckiest or unluckiest man in history, depending on how you look at it. He survived not one, but both atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. After the first bomb hit Hiroshima, Yamaguchi, thinking he'd escaped the worst, headed to Nagasaki, where he experienced the second bombing. Surviving these crazy events turned him into a vocal advocate against nuclear weapons, dedicating his life to promoting peace. Number 16, Aaron Ralston. So this guy named Aaron Ralston is an adventurous dude who loves climbing and exploring. Back in 2003, he went on this crazy solo trip to Blue John Canyon in Utah. He didn't tell anyone he was going. While he's doing his thing, a massive 800-pound boulder decides to crash the party and traps his hand against the canyon wall. Talk about a sticky situation. He was stuck there for 3 days and things were looking pretty grim. In order to survive, he had to amputate his own arm. After all that, he still had to climb out of the canyon and hike back to his car. And I know what you guys are thinking, but he actually made it. 4 hours after he cut off his arm, a helicopter swooped in and rescued him. His story inspired a movie called 127 Hours. Nowadays, Ralston travels around sharing his story and inspiring others to never give up, no matter what life throws their way. Plus, he still loves climbing and exploring. Talk about a true survivor. Number 17, Stephen Callahan. Stephen Callahan's survival story is truly incredible. In 1981, he decided to sail solo across the Atlantic in his small boat. Everything was going fine until one night, all went wrong. His boat was likely hit by a whale or shark, leaving a huge hole in the hull. As the boat started to sink, Callahan had to dive into the water several times to grab whatever essential gear he could. With barely any food and water, he ended up in a 6-foot circular raft, drifting about 800 miles west of the Canary Islands. He had to get creative to survive, using a spear gun to fish and solar still to make drinking water. About 2 weeks into this, he saw a ship and tried to signal it, but it didn't stop. As he drifted further away from major shipping routes, things got even tougher, and by the 50th day, he was dealing with sores from the salt water, severe dehydration, and exhaustion, all while struggling to keep his raft in one piece. After a crazy 76 days at sea, during which he lost 1/3 of his body weight and faced extreme physical and mental challenges, Callahan was finally rescued. Fishermen off the coast of Guadeloupe spotted him, thanks to the marine life that had gathered around his raft. Even thinking of this is making my head spin. Number 18, Alexander Selkirk. Long before Tom Hanks talked to a volleyball in Castaway, Alexander Selkirk was living the real deal. Marooned on an uninhabited island off Chile in 1704, Selkirk survived for over 4 years, inspiring Daniel Defoe's famous novel Robinson Crusoe. His survival story was amazing. He made friends with wildcats and used goats as a food source. His adventure is something that would inspire anyone. Number 19, Douglas Mawson. Douglas Mawson's story of Antarctic survival might just be the craziest on this list, and you are definitely not ready for this. Douglas had been to Antarctica many times, but in 1912, during an Australasian Antarctic expedition, he found himself alone after a tragic accident that took the lives of his companions. Mawson then went on a 100-mile trek across the ice to return to base, battling starvation and extreme conditions. They were there to set up the first ever radio communications in Antarctica. After setting up a smaller base on Macquarie Island, they made it to Commonwealth Bay in early 1912, where they somehow managed to build a hut in winds that could whip up to 240 kilometers per hour. Mawson's team split into groups for different missions, and he led what they called the Far Eastern Shore Party. They initially made good progress, mapping new areas and surviving on limited supplies, despite some scary moments with hidden crevasses. Then, disaster struck. Lieutenant Belgrave Ninnis, managing the dog sled, fell into a crevasse along with their main supplies. Suddenly, Mawson and his other companion, Xavier Mertz, found themselves in a dire situation, low on food and over 300 kilometers away from any other human. They faced constant blizzards and severe physical ailments, likely from vitamin A poisoning after eating the livers of their dogs. Yes, they had to eat their own dogs to survive. What you see on the screen right now is from the actual diary of the man. Even thinking of this is making my stomach feel weak. And as you would expect, Mawson was in rough shape, losing hair, skin peeling, and barely able to move. Despite all this, Mawson's expedition gathered scientific data and even helped improve long-range radio tech with the extra time they spent stuck there. When they returned, they were hailed as heroes, and rightfully so. Number 20, Elaine Esposito. Esposito holds the record for the world's longest coma. When she was just 6 years old, she went in for a routine appendix operation on August 6, 1941. But she never woke up from the general anesthetic and ended up in a coma that lasted 37 years and 111 days. She finally passed away in 1978. The press called her Sleeping Beauty, and her story touched many hearts. Despite being in a coma, she survived numerous health issues like pneumonia and measles. Her family was so hopeful for a miracle that they even took her to the grotto at Lourdes in France. But sadly, she stayed in her coma until the end. That's a wrap on these amazing survival stories. If you enjoyed these incredible stories, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.